Hi, I'm Doug Fairnick, Dean of the Faculty of Science at the University of Regina, and welcome to our next installment of Getting to Know You Our Science. In this installment, we're going to meet Professor Britt Hall of the Department of Biology. Britt is an environmental biologist, and I think you will enjoy meeting her in today's video.
Hello everyone, I'm Zora Zahir, a PhD student in the Department of Biology under supervision of Dr. Britt Hall. Thank you so much for accepting here today to answer some of the questions. The first one is that, where did you grow up and what is the most memorable place from there?
Okay, well, I grew up in the city of Winnipeg, and Winnipeg is a fantastic city, and I would encourage everybody to go and visit it, and if you do and you are able, go to the 10 Spa. But that's for another discussion. I also spent my summers just north of Kenora in the middle of the boreal forest, and my mom was a teacher, so that's where we spent every summer, and that is pretty much my favorite place in the world, in the boreal forest next to those beautiful lakes.
Outside of being a professor, how do you enjoy spending your time?
Oh, that changes throughout your life. When I was young and unencumbered, I spent a lot of time on those lakes, either working on them at the Experimental Lakes area, which is a federal research station near Kenora, or canoeing and going camping and just being in the forest. But then I moved to Saskatchewan, where we don't have a lot of forest, and I then had a couple of kids. And so, of course, the way I spend my time is vastly different now than maybe I would like it to be. But my kids are getting older, and so that gives me more time to spend outside camping. I'm a winter and summer cyclist, and basically I just love to observe the world and the way the world works.
Oh, thank you. So now that we talk about the research area and then observe the world, what got you interested in biology when you were young?
Well, okay, so my grandfather really wanted me to be a geneticist. My father thought I would be a physicist. And I never really considered anything but science when I was really young. And so I went to the University of Manitoba, and I did a biochemistry degree with this thought that I would be going into some sort of genetics related research. And it was a joint micro and a joint chemistry degree back then. They didn't have a department of biochemistry. But in the fourth year of my BSc, I started to be involved with an environmental group on campus. And that, combined with the fact that my aunt and uncle were environmental scientists, led me to start a master's program at the Experimental Lakes area that were neither physics or genetics, and instead environmental research. And that was basically when I realized that was what fueled my passion.
Oh, thank you. And you had a long journey. So what scientific advance of yours are you most happy about in all these years?
Yeah. So when I went to my master's, I was going to do some work on PCBs. And PCBs are a pretty common contaminant. They are a hydrocarbon contaminant and difficult to work with, but I was intent on looking at joining a project where we were going to add PCBs to a lake, but that project didn't get any funding. And fortuitously, another project on mercury in flooded systems, there was a master's student who had canceled at the last minute. So I joined that project. It was called the Experimental Lakes Area Reservoir Project, or ELARP. And for ELARP, we looked at what happens when you flood a large wetland pond and what happens to the mercury and the carbon in the system. And we found that when we flooded a large carbon reservoir, we had more methyl mercury that was produced. And so then I went and I did some work at the, I went consulting. I went to move to the coast, to the West Coast. I did some consulting for a year, and I always just was so excited about mercury. So I worked with a bunch of engineers, and the engineers would always come and ask me about mercury. I want to study more mercury. And so another project came up, and that was called the Flooded Uplands Dynamic Experiment, where we expanded the ELARP, and we actually looked at what happens to mercury cycling when we flood 3 different pieces of forest. So the thing that I really loved about the ELARP and the FloodX was that it was a large team of researchers that were all working to solve this question. And it really fueled my interest in really the way things work on a large scale. And so I'm really proud of the work that we did as that large team, and that work just holds a special place in my heart as kind of my favorite work that I did. And I think that's probably maybe typical of people who did graduate work. It's always a really special time in a person's life.
Oh, I love your answer, and it shows that how much time you spend on your research, and then you love whatever you're doing. So I'm just going to move up a little bit from the science and go to the teaching part. What is your favorite class to teach, and why?
I teach 3 upper level classes, which is quite a privilege, and because I get those students that really want to be there. And so it's really hard for me to choose which is my favorite class. Biogeochemistry, global biogeochemistry, of course, is the course that's most tied to my research. I really like ecosystems since glaciation, because we get to think about time in a large scale and how the world has changed over the course of 10,000 years. And I'm just going to be starting to teach environmental microbiology again, and I really like that course because it really links in how those microbes are so important in how the environment works. So I don't think I can choose a favorite, because they all mesh together in what I'm really interested in, and that is how the environment changes over time, over space, and with different pressures.
Yeah, I've been on some of the classes. They're amazing. So moving from class, let's just give us some advice. If any students wants to study this field, what is your advice for them?
I could give lots of advice. I like giving advice. I've been thinking about work-life balance for students lately. There's some concern out there that graduate students are kind of encouraged to work all the time, and it's got me thinking about the fact that we should be working all the time, but maybe not in the ways that you would think. So at the lab bench, at a computer, that's of course really important as your work. But just as important is observing the world. And it doesn't really matter what science you practice, but honing those observational skills will serve anybody always. And so, I would say take that time to just be in the space that you're being in, and take the time to just think about what you're curious about, and try and relate what you're learning about to your world. So it's a little bit easier for us as environmental scientists because we study the world and the outside. But of course our natural world and the world that we exist in is governed by all sorts of different things. And to observe them and relate them back to your work is always going to make your work richer for both you and for the intended audience that you'll eventually be. So that's I think the advice I would give today. It might be different if you'd asked me a different day.
I love the answer though. So now I'm just going to ask the last question. What's on the horizon for you or for your work in the future?
All I can think of is dealing with this filtration problem. Okay. So right now, our lab is looking at trying to figure out why inorganic mercury that rains down from the sky on all of our wetlands and lakes turns into methyl mercury, which is the toxic form of mercury that gets into fish. And throughout the course of my entire research career, I've really been interested in that, what controls that process. There's a lot of things that control that process. And we're every day just basically trying to get a little bit further in that understanding. So the horizon seems a long way off because of the fact that the sites that we look at are really, really difficult sites to study. They're very, they change very quickly over time and in space, and so that means that it's very difficult to isolate environmental factors that will control this process. But I've got a few ideas that we're pursuing, and I can hope by the end of my research career that we can have a better understanding, but I don't think it's coming soon. I think there's a lot there that we still need to understand about these really vital prairie wetland systems.
So you tell us about your favorite class that you don't have, but do you have a least favorite class that you ever teach?
When I first came to the department, I was assigned half of the Introductory Biology 100, Introductory Biology 100. And I felt like a fish out of water. I didn't do a general biology degree. I was a biochemist, I was a biogeochemist, and I was teaching introductory biology to 400 students. It was not my best work. So that is my least favorite class to teach. And within a couple of years, I didn't have to teach it anymore, and now we have absolutely phenomenal teachers, professors teaching that class, and that's the way it should be.
Okay. So, do you have any least favorite job that you don't like to do in the lab?
I don't like lab work.
Oh my god!
Surprise! I actually would rather be anywhere but the lab. I love going to the field, obviously, collecting samples. I love working on the data. That's probably my favorite thing. I love making graphs. When a good graph shows itself and gives me the trends, it's just like, phew. But the time in between getting the samples and getting the data, not interested. But I do it. So, you know, least favorite, all of it. Most favorite, none of it.
You shouldn't reveal your secret to your students.
That's why I have students here.
Thank you so much, and that was a wrap. Thank you so much again for giving us your time, and I learned a lot today about you, which was amazing, and then hopefully our audience also learned something and then get to know you better. Thank you so much.